My name is Norbert Goldfield. Most of you know who I am, but some of you don't. I'm the founder and executive director of Ask Nurses and Doctors. The mission of the organization is to organize local healthcare professionals in support of either candidates or incumbents who have a health reform platform or in support of specific legislation. With respect to the latter, for example, we're just finishing up a contract with Mainers for Working Families on medical debt legislation, and we're actively working in a number of states, almost all swing states or swing districts, and in addition in Florida. This is an opportunity for me to also tell you that for the state of Florida, we have an active group of Florida Ask Nurses and Doctors professionals. On May 14th, we will have a presentation by the former Surgeon General of Florida, Scott Rifkes, who will be talking about the assault on public health in Florida. Today, though, I'm just very fortunate to have a continuation of a very wonderful series of meeting with old friends and new colleagues. We've been, over the past several months, having a session of what I call seasoned activists and young activists. And 2 sessions ago, Bill Fleischer, wonderful labor organizer and activist, who's a seasoned activist, said very clearly that Norbert, and he said this when it was recording, Norbert, I just saw my doctor and I feel very young. So even though it's seasoned activists and young activists, it's just a joy to have you both on. And what I'd like to do is introduce both of you and have the pleasure and honor of having Dave Fleischer and Andrew Goldstein. I believe, I'm not sure, but I know Andrew Goldstein. I met through a colleague, Ranit Mishori. I believe I met you, David, and correct me if I'm wrong, through Andrew. Is that true?
I think so.
Yeah, so what luck. Um, what I'm going to do is briefly introduce them, and then they will take it away. I would ask you to put your questions in the chat as much as possible, though what I find is that unlike some other issues that are in the national spotlight, um, this issue should not create a lot of heat and heated argument. So I have no problem if people feel strongly they would rather, ask the question themselves, just raise your hand in whichever way you'd like. The format of today is I'll introduce David and Andrew, David and Andrew, and they will each talk and introduce themselves in a little bit more detail. And that'll take between 20 to 30 minutes. And then we'll open it up for questions. So, though I'm sure that if there's a point of clarification that you would like to have clarified right then and there, I would imagine that, either Andrew or Dave would be happy to answer. But in essence, as you probably read, Dave Fleischer directed the team that pioneered deep canvassing, and it's an approach to voter persuasion that gets more people on our side and voting even when more conventional approaches fall short. He is currently helping changing the conversation together as it deep canvasses in Philadelphia, as well as meeting with groups in Wisconsin who are curious about deep canvassing in cities and neighborhoods in the southeastern part of the state. He and I, David and I just recently sent off a paper for those of you who are health professionals. Most of you are, not all of you, that I recognize, that is on the relationship between motivational interviewing and deep canvassing. And at least thus far, it hasn't been rejected by the second journal that we sent it to. It's only been a couple of weeks, but we'll just have to see what happens. Andrew Goldstein is a primary care doctor at Bellevue Hospital in New York City and is an activist and organizer in several health justice spaces, including the New York Doctors Coalition and the Doctors Council SEIU Union. Knowing that elections have deep stakes, he started participating in deep canvassing election work in 2018 and has since been involved in helping organize deep canvassing campaigns in 20 and 2024. I think we'd all agree, those of us on the Zoom would all agree that this election is nothing short of absolutely critical. Uh, and I, for one, am one of those people who passionately believes that deep canvassing is a real important tool that I'm sure could really help in this election. So I'm going to have Dave start. Andrew will speak after that, and then Dave will also speak again. So Dave, thank you so much for being on, and I'll let you pass it on to Andrew when you're ready.
Sure. Thank you, Norbert. Really appreciate being here. Uh, so I'm Dave Fleischer. The pronouns I use are he and him. And I've been a political organizer my whole life, even starting as a boy in Chillicothe, Ohio. So I've been canvassing for more than 50 years. I'm a generalist. I've done almost every job that is part of a campaign. Uh, and uh, and so when I think back, though, there's just no doubt in my mind that the best work of my life has been what I've done in the last 14 years, because that's when, by accident, we discovered deep canvassing. And it's so obviously a more effective way to persuade people to reconsider their habits, their behavior, and their views. So we've had success reducing prejudice. We've had success on a variety of issues. And ever since Trump came on the scene, we've really used it primarily to talk to two groups of people, the two who are most up for grabs in this election. The first of which, by far the more numerous, are non voters and people who rarely vote in presidential elections. That constitutes a third of the eligible voters in the country. Uh, Glad to tell you more about them. Uh, but I'm also curious about, even though they're a little bit tougher, there are a subset of conservative, Republican, former Trump voters who are deeply conflicted about the vote they cast and what kind of vote they're going to cast this year. And, we're talking 10 to 25% of the votes Trump got last time. And so it's a very large group, even though it's dwarfed by the non voters. So I'd be glad to talk about those folks if you're interested. The thing about deep canvassing, it's not just that it's my opinion that it works. Uh, it's been validated in repeated randomized controlled trials run by independent researchers. If you're curious about the research, I'm glad to address that as well. But it's turned out that not only do we have a big impact in terms of the magnitude of change, but when we help somebody change their mind, it stays changed. The change is durable in a way that is almost never seen in other forms of political persuasion. So I'm going to go into any of these things in detail if you have questions about it, but I want to flip it to you, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Norbert. Thanks so much, Dave. Really glad to join you all tonight. Really happy to see a bunch of health professionals and other people who might be coming at this from a health lens. There are groups out there who are talking about how democracy is essential to our health and encouraging health workers to participate. I arrived at that kind of as an armchair politically interested person prior to the 2016 election, who then had a call to action moment on election day night when Trump was clearly going to be the winner. And I went from, reading news and talking about politics, but not really doing much, to eventually allocating about half of my time to doing political activism and organizing. And that's sort of how I came across Norbert, because he similarly felt that call to action and that dedication of time and budgeting the amount of time in your life towards this kind of work. A lot of that initially looked like, fighting ACA repeal and protecting Medicaid and Planned Parenthood funding, showing up in ways I had not politically participated before with protest, civil disobedience, lobbying, bird dogging, op-ed writing, all that stuff. That was all very new to me. But I also hadn't really done much electioneering. I voted pretty frequently, and I talked about elections with people who are in my life. But I really, I did knock doors for Obama in '08, but that was because a friend invited me, and I kind of was dragged there. And in 2018, knowing that 2020 was going to be crucial and knowing that 2018 for Trump's legislative agenda was going to be crucial, really wanted to be involved in engaging voters. And I heard about a group called Changing the Conversation, which was based out of Brooklyn. And I live in New York City, I'm a primary care doctor. And the only, you know, Republican member of Congress at that time was in Staten Island and part of Brooklyn. And I wanted to act locally. And so I joined up with this group and knocked some doors in Staten Island, which was the first time I had done deep canvassing and was brand new to me. And what I found compelling was a lot of what Dave had mentioned, which is, there's this evidence of effect size. And like, I'm an evidence-based medicine junkie. I love trial review and figuring out what are the best interventions for healthcare. And so it was good to see that political science actually had some, rigorous evidence for this tool, because I didn't want to be wasting my time or anyone else's. And that's kind of how I dove into it. And I'll just say, I feel not much nervousness talking to patients, but I think public speaking, even in a group like this, back in 2016, I would have been very nervous. And in 2018, I think I was also probably pretty nervous engaging voters directly as a stranger. And I think, being in spaces with deep canvassers, it's not just the intervention itself, the method of deep canvassing. The ethos of it, baked into it really is listening, treating people with respect. And so actually, as a volunteer, you feel much more respected and more deeply engaged than I think many other traditional voter engagement campaigns like text banking and phone banking, where you are totally a digital entity clicking text to be sent. There's not much of a team, that you're not really seen as a person. So I do think this uh, field of voter engagement, where not just voters but volunteers are seen as whole people and actual people, is really been essential for me. Anyway, so after engaging with Changing the Conversation in 2018, in 2020, they were going to be working in Philadelphia, which is the area I grew up around. And it was in the thick of the pandemic. And I wanted to volunteer, ended up doing a lot of public health protocol development with Dave's group, the Leadership Lab, and Changing the Conversation, which came together. That's when I met Dave. And yeah, from there, didn't just do public health protocol design, also was doing deep canvassing, and then was training other people to do deep canvassing and supporting teams of people. And yeah, it just really felt like probably one of the things that I was most embedded into a team of people who wanted to really do the work of knocking on doors, talking to people, and winning an election that had really high stakes. And during that time, I probably brought in, I don't know, 30 or 40 people in my social and professional world to do that work with us. And I think about half of them were health workers. And we can talk about it a bit during the session, but as Norbert was alluding to, there are deep overlaps between clinical work and voter engagement. You're an individual talking to an individual, and deep canvassing in particular really leans into some of the skill set that those of us in healthcare have in terms of listening with respect, trying to evoke things. I pulled up the motivationalinterviewing.org sort of key elements of motivational interviewing, and it's so many overlaps with deep canvassing. So, really accepting people, approaching with compassion, having open questions, helping people reflect, summarizing what they've said, helping them focus, and then helping them develop a plan from there. that's very much how deep canvassing operates. And so I think, one, health professionals have a responsibility to go beyond the clinical world and to advocate for other patients in elections and in other political spheres. But two, we actually, have a lot of tools that we bring to the table that I think are really powerful and also will make you feel good using those tools in elections that you care a lot about, especially when we've been so disempowered by many, many forces. So yeah, really nice to meet you all and happy to talk more about any of those things or other areas that you're curious about.
And the only really big difference I want to flag between motivational interviewing and deep canvassing is in motivational interviewing, you're the doctor or you're the health professional. And so the words that come out of your mouth uh, are potentially immediately of interest to the other person. They have come to see you and they know you have expertise. Uh, when we are going door to door, talking with non voters, uh, uh, it is not immediately apparent to them that we have expertise. Uh, and so there is a piece of work we have to do to earn their trust. And what we have learned is the best way to do that is actually to reassure them by telling them a true story from our own lives about somebody we love and a vulnerable moment of ours with them. That helps the other person, right? Because here we are coming to talk about voting to a non-voter. And so what are they expecting? Shame and judgment is what they're expecting. And and if we indulge in that or if we don't counter that, we're in big trouble. But when we tell a story that shows us as human, and then we invite them to tell us a story about somebody they love, that's where we end up with a connection that opens up the possibility that they will allow us to help them reflect on what really matters most to them. And the best way I know to show you what that's like is I'm about to share my screen and show you a little bit of video from a real voter conversation. I'm going to show you 3 short snippets. Norbert, yeah.
Just a quick thing, and you could do it either before or after, a very good question came through the chat. It's very simply, what is deep canvassing? So you might want to either talk about it before or after, or I'll leave it to both of you in terms of whichever way you'd like to do it.
In a nutshell, it's dialogue in the face of disagreement with the qualities Andrew flagged, where we bring respect, humility, kindness, all of the non normative behaviors, honesty, right? These are the things that are absent from politics at the moment and are part of what repel people from it. So, really, treating a stranger with in the same way that you would really treat a close friend, where you want to have a serious conversation and you might in some way seriously disagree, right? When we're going to talk to a non-voter, there's at least a disagreement in our habits when it comes to voting. So I hope that helps, but I do think
Yeah,
showing this.
I might just add
Yeah, sure.
one thing to piggyback on that, Dave. So imagine you just told someone, you just showed up to someone's house and you told them to eat healthy. That's kind of what a lot of traditional voter engagement can look like. Like, hey, are you voting? Okay, good. Or okay, why not? And then it's very quick, abrupt. There's not much of a process to it. And similar to, um, you know, motivational interviewing, again, I'll make that comparison. Like there's a method to engaging people in their own thinking about their habits of action. And it's a facilitated discussion. And so instead of a 1 to 3 minute, you knock on a door, you say, hey, are you this person? Hey, are you voting? Do you know where you're voting? Can I help you vote? Okay, bye. And that's what the traditional conversation can often look like. It's very quick. You're trying to get through as many doors as possible. I think rushed health workers might have a sense of how superficial and pressured and rushed that engagement could look like, and how that doesn't feel as well on the other side as when we're more patient. Whereas in the deep canvassing campaigns I've been a part of, it's been much more of, an open-ended question to get people talking, and then asking them on maybe like a scale of 1 to 10 how likely they are to vote in the upcoming election, and then sharing for several minutes a personal story to do that trust building that Dave mentioned. And then from there, eliciting some real, personal connection to the values of care that someone has towards other people in their lives, and then drawing the connection between that care that they have for people in their lives and how we want our country managed. And then we get to the concrete logistics of, can we help you vote? And so, it's a very different style of conversation. It's much more patient, and it might take 3 times as much time as a traditional voter engagement conversation, but it also has an effect size that's much larger. And I think you feel that when you're actually doing it. Anyway, Dave can give you a really concrete example of this by showing you this video that he's prepared.
Yeah, I'm going to show you 3 different slices of a conversation that actually occurred on the south side of Wisconsin when we ran a 100-person canvass in the March of 2020. The canvasser's name is Mark, the voters, and what Mark knew before he knocked on her door was that she had missed all 3 of the last presidential elections. She was registered to vote, did not vote. And so what I'm going to do first is show you, the conversation began with him knocking on the door, not only introducing himself, but getting her permission to video. And then that's where the video picks up, right as he's asking the question we found helpful to get people talking right away, which was, if Donald Trump was here with us right now on your front porch and you had 2 minutes with him, what do you want to tell him? And that's where it picks up. And first, I'm just going to show you the first 45 seconds after that, because it we'll want to pause because you might have a reaction to it.
Trump was here with us right now, and you had 2 minutes with him, what would you tell him?
Get out of my house.
On a scale of 0 to 10, 0 meaning you definitely will not vote, 10 meaning you will vote. In the middle, you've got mixed feelings. What's the right number for you?
That I will vote? Oh,
Yeah,
10.
it's 10?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I don't not ever vote.
Great. And why?
It
Why,
was-
why is 10 the right number?
It's the way I was raised. It's just
Okay.
what you do.
Yeah.
My mom and dad went to every little, judge, alderman, whatever. Yeah.
So for me,
So let's pause it right there for a second. Please turn your cameras on if you're at all comfortable with that, because now I'm going to invite reactions, just a couple of quick reactions. What has struck you, even in this very early moment in the conversation? And feel free just to unmute yourself and speak.
Well, he quickly determined that she was not a Trump voter.
Yes, that's right. And mostly we were in neighborhoods where almost nobody's a Trump voter, but nevertheless, we want to know, because we're not going to waste time with somebody who is an enthusiastic, unconflicted Trump voter when we're so close to the election. Yeah, what else did people notice?
Well, did you say that she's someone who did not vote in the previous elections? It seemed like she was saying she does vote all the time. So
Yes, Jeffrey, I bet you've never had a patient like this. Right? Yes, for whatever reason, non-voters present in a variety of ways, but this is one of the most common ways. And we don't know why, right, in this case, but that is certainly, at the very least, how she wants to present herself, and maybe it's really how she sees herself. Yeah. So did you notice what Mark did not do, right? Was say, well, I've got the voter list here, and you've actually bombed out the last three presidential elections, right? The same way that clinically you would probably never dwell on the fact that somebody's aspiration to lose weight or stop smoking is one that they have not met before, right? So we're looking for a non-judgmental way to proceed, but we do want to give them the chance to self-report something about how they see themselves as a voter. Cool. Any other quick reaction? Then I'm going to show. Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead, Peter.
Hold on a second. So why waste your time who's a serial embarrassed loser?
Why talk to a non-voter?
Whose last three elections, she hasn't voted. Yes, she said that she did.
Well, why do you treat a smoker who's had trouble quitting? The reason is to help them. And also, the truth is, we need them. The country is almost evenly divided. This election's going to be decided by such a small number of votes in a small number of states that, as a practical matter, it's going to be the closest or one of the closest in our country's history. And it may turn out that a few hundred votes determines who wins. So we want to see if we can motivate non-voters to vote or infrequent voters to vote. And we actually want to see if we can motivate them to begin a journey to becoming a chronic voter so that they'll participate again and again. Because a very large percentage of the non-voters, they don't know much about politics, they don't have a lot of information, but they do know that Donald Trump is bad news. She knows that, right? So if she did vote, that'd be a good thing. So that's why, Peter. Yeah. I'm going to now, and we can come back and talk more about this beginning, but I want to show you what happened next so you can see what Mark does. Because it's, and I'm just going to show you a couple of minutes really, and then pause it again.
Voting's political, but it's also personal.
Yeah.
So I think about the people I love. And so the person I've been thinking about a lot lately is I got a son who's 18.
18?
18.
I have grandsons older than
Yeah, well, he's my middle.
Yeah.
And he's a great kid, right? I mean, I know him as dad, but he's like this kid who's active in school, and he's just got his Eagle Scout.
You live here in town?
Yeah, over Wallington.
Oh, Tulsa, that's where I lived when all my boys were born.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's been great, but he's a kid that people love.
Yeah.
But I would say about a year ago, well, the last couple of years, we've noticed he's got real issues around anxiety.
I cannot hear you.
The last couple of years, he's had a lot of issues around anxiety and depression. And so he actually came to us a year ago and said, I need to go to a hospital.
Good for him.
Yeah, so we called to do the intake process. We weren't sure that we were going to take him. 45 minutes later, they called us and said,
come on in.
Bring him in now. And I'll tell you, we were not sure what, we were taking him, right?
I have a daughter, 41, who's bipolar and has had problems since she was 3 and 4 years old. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
I know where you're coming from.
Yeah, and so he went. But as we were taking him in, we said to him, how do we talk about this with folks? What do you want us to share with people? Because this is your story. And he looked at us and says, oh, I texted everybody already.
Oh.
And the thing that was amazing about that was because it's something people don't talk about.
Right.
And so the second he did that, two things happened. There were folks who came out of the woodwork to help us.
Yeah.
Like they shared. There were other folks who had shared this with no one, and they didn't realize other people dealt with it.
Have that same problem.
Yeah, and it was a real gift. And so he was there for a little bit. He's now in a pretty decent place, but
Good.
You don't know.
It's
right?
a lifetime thing.
Yeah, I'm learning that. And then I will tell you right now, the goal is for him to go to school in 6 months, and That scares me.
Good for him, yeah.
Yeah. So how about you? Just kind of somebody you love, right?
Cool. Let's pause it there. So, any reactions to what Mark just did? You could like it, hate it, not understand it, wonder when the hell he's going to talk about politics. You could have any reaction at all. What are you thinking as you watch this?
Well, it's not fair because I I already know about the canvassing, but I think one of the things that struck me is that he kind of kept going, even though she said that she had a 41-year-old who had, uh, you know, mental health problems. And I think I would have, he looked like he didn't want to get off track. And I think that would have gotten me a little off track.
Yeah. Yeah. On the other hand, right, he definitely is listening to her. And in a moment, he's about to invite her to tell a story of her own. So we'll see if that's the story she wants to tell.
Well, isn't the big deal here that he's building a relationship with her, so she likes him, and presumably this is going to end somehow with, well, you'll do things with people you like. Is that going? I don't know the answer. So.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I don't know that being liked is enough. So yes, he's very likable, but he's also vulnerable, right? He's telling a story about where he almost.
I need to ask everybody to put themselves on mute.
Great, thank you. So he's telling a story where he wasn't sure of himself. In some ways, his son was the one initiating this. And so it's a story of him being a vulnerable dad who really cares. And the purpose of this story, Jeffrey, it's not that we expect them to remember it, and they don't remember it, actually, very often. But in that moment, it helps them realize that we're not going to judge or shame them. And so then, when he asks her in a minute to tell a story about somebody she loves, she's going to be a lot more likely to trust him enough to tell a real story, not just a superficial story, but a story that really matters to her. Because ultimately, the argument we're making, Jeffrey, is that voting's a gift you give to the people you love. And so it's not a gift they give to us because they like us. It's a gift for the people who they already are deeply concerned about. So you'll see how it unfolds.
Hank has a question.
Sure. Go ahead, Hank.
This is a question for later, but this is the first brush with it. Time. The clock is ticking, and every time I've been door to door, here's your brochure. I've got 30 seconds. Thank you, because I got to go down the street. So the question is, but don't answer it now because it's for later. But
oh no, I'm going to answer it right now.
First impressions are, gee, that's a lot of labor, and that's either billable hours or pay or volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a meta question for later. But first impressions, I'm going, dang, that takes a lot of time.
I'm just going to go to the first thing you said. Your assumption is that 30 seconds is all you get. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy if you proceed that way. You're going to talk fast. You're not going to be human. You're going to do a lot of telling. And then the voter will be sick of you after 30 seconds and you'll be done. But it turns out when we actually invite the other person to speak about something important and then we listen to them, spending 15 minutes with them turns out to be easy because it's so rare for them to have somebody respectfully listen to what they care about. So that is.
The campaign has told me I've got 150 cards to hand out, so I've only got 30 seconds.
Yeah, but what if handing out those 150 cards nets you 0 additional votes? It's like if you told me, gee, let's get rid of doctors' visits in the office. They're so friggin' time consuming. Let's just mail everybody a brochure or stick it with the pizza flyer under their door. I don't really think that would improve public health in the United States. So the question is, do we want to do lousy medicine for a small number of voters, or do we want to treat them with a real treatment that's going to help, even though that means it's going to take longer, and ultimately we will talk with fewer voters, but our impact will be bigger. But thank you.
Let me
Yeah.
piggyback on that for 1 second, Dave. So
Oh, yeah, sure.
there's also like a virtuous cycle and an unvirtuous cycle that can happen with this. I know lots of people who cared about the 2020 election and tried text banking, and they found it to be miserable. So their number of volunteer hours contributed went from several a day to 0 pretty quickly because they just didn't find it to be effective. Whereas, there's this question in the chat from Mitch of how I brought 30 colleagues in. I think there's the virtuous cycle of doing deep canvassing or other voter engagement or other political activities that feel effective and meaningful, where you actually are energized by it, you bring in other people, and it's not just an individual volunteer session and a metric of how many doors knocked or flyers delivered. It's about a campaign that is as big and powerful as possible and engaging as many voters effectively as possible. And the individual volunteer session, if it actually feels really good because you made 2 or 3 votes happen in a 4-hour session, as opposed to feeling like a lot of people were just mad at you for knocking on their door and talking with them in a very rushed way and not really knowing. You leave energized, you invite those friends are energized, they feel like impact is possible. And so I agree, it is much slower. Numerically, it feels less powerful, but the data on voter outcomes is what's really important, and the feel of voter persuasion happening in front of you is what's most powerful. So yeah, I think like in aggregate, actually the impact numbers are probably higher, even if the doors knocked or conversations had numbers are lower.
Yeah, I'll just add one little thing, Andrew. The term I would use for how most campaigns measure the effectiveness of their voter contact, right? Usually the unit that they use is doors knocked. But that's a vanity metric because it doesn't tell you anything about how many of them who were very unlikely to vote are now likely to vote. So in medicine, if you measure the wrong thing, you don't know if your treatment's any good. The thing that really matters is what researchers have measured when they've looked at deep canvassing. So it's really, if you were going to volunteer only 4 hours of your time between now and November, Hank, you're going to have more of an impact deep canvassing. Even though if you text bank or do a conventional canvass, you will have either knocked on more doors or texted a gazillion people. But let me show you what happens next with Mark. So you can see how we finish this kind of a conversation and how we invite the voter to talk.
Probably more, not so much individually, people I love, although I think more of the common good.
Okay.
What people that have less than me, and I don't have a lot, need.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Which is the common good piece. Well, here's what I also heard, is when we started the conversation, you talked about your parents.
My parents?
I get the feeling, yeah, that you maybe got that from them.
Probably. Both my parents were very active in church, were Catholics. My mom, I guess, I always say she learned to drive in her early 50s, but apparently she drove before that, but we never had a car. My father never drove, ever drove a car. Was proud that he never had a license. But they were very, when my mom started to drive, it was the little old ladies to church and to the doctors and whatever. And my dad did the same thing. He always helped other people. So, and then when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I belonged to a group called Young Christian Workers, which was run by the Catholic Church, or it was Catholic. And we did a lot of observe and act. You observed situations, you acted. So that's kind of more. And I just met with a friend this morning who I had met. Well, he was a friend of my ex-husband's and is a friend of my ex-husband's and was in Young Christian Workers with me. And he lives up on the north side and has always lived there. And are into that kind of thing too, you know, about helping others. And I think when I vote, that's what I do. I don't vote because I need something, that we all need something. It's more like it, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay.
Sharing that.
Okay.
Two more questions, which is, when I listen to your story and mine, again, it reminds me why voting is so important as you share that story both about your parents but also the young Catholic workers. When we love somebody, we rely on them and they rely on us.
Yes.
You know, we would argue that Trump is the opposite, right?
Oh.
He strikes as he's out for himself. So I want to stop Trump. Do you have that feeling too?
Oh, yeah.
Going back to the scale from 1 to 10, 0 means, you know, we talked about this before, 0 means you definitely won't vote, 10 means you definitely will, and middle is mixed feelings.
10, always 10.
All right, best number to reach you.
414-647.
And I'll stop it there. Great. So any reactions to the totality of the conversation or the last part, or any questions about any of this? I see there's several hands. So Norbert, if you want to call on people, that's great.
Peter and then Peter Bolin and then Dan Stone. Or maybe we'll start with Dan because he hasn't spoken. Would that be okay, Peter?
Sure.
Dan, nice to see you.
Oh, thanks. I thought it was a great interview and I enjoyed it. Yeah, that is me. I myself do have done since 2000 every election except 2020 because of the COVID. I've done pre-election canvassing, usually the few days before the election. So it does seem to me that there's sort of a time element in it. I think that was in March 2020. So there's a fair amount of time. But when you're right down to the election or election day, there are people who
they're really pushing back. It's interesting.
Who don't know that where their polling place is, or they need a ride, or they weren't aware that the election is this week. You know, so those sorts of things that you can handle in a short period of time, and doing so many more when you don't have the time anymore. So it seems to me that you sort of have to change your strategy as you move closer to the election. So, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. But I did enjoy, and it seemed very effective.
Well, I'll just say that sure, there's merit to what you're saying. But if we deal with the transaction of voting and we haven't previously built a relationship with them, we might do a great job telling people where their polling place is and they're still not going to vote. So if you want to be part of a well-run campaign, be part of one that starts a lot earlier, takes the time to do this relational organizing, so that then when you're getting back to this person the second or third time or fourth time to help them actually finally vote, and you're just helping them with logistics, there's a very good chance they're going to follow through. And so in Philadelphia, we had a very truncated schedule because of COVID, because in Wisconsin, after this canvass in March, nobody picked up deep canvassing again because in the long interim where there wasn't a safe way to do it. In Philly, Pennsylvania moved the 3 counties we were working in from the red zone to the green zone in late July. And so we had 100 days. And all I can tell you is on the day of the election, I still felt better having a full deep canvas conversation with somebody who we had never previously spoken with, rather than just assuming that everybody would get what they needed with a 1 minute interaction. And the goal then, right, is to have a lot of volunteers helping. We had over 400 people canvassing. So then the pressure isn't on you to somehow do this large number of people that you're not all going to get to unless it's the most superficial interaction possible.
Yeah, and the part that's most important and what I think Dave is saying that I would urge people to focus on is not that last weekend. Like there's a lot of impact to be had there, but that's still the tip of the iceberg. And I think most people wait for their volunteering to be in that final stretch. But whether it's missing the registration window or the vote by mail window or all these other windows that happened earlier, or just it not being in that critical stretch when people are getting 50 phone calls and lots of door knocking, but actually before when there's a little bit more of breathing and reflection time, that's where the more persuadable and motivatable people might lie. I think when you're talking to someone who forgot about election day or forgot where it is, and it's just a quick information gap you're filling, yeah, absolutely. Like those conversations at the last minute are needed and more powerful. But I don't want us to lose the tip of the below the water iceberg that exists for the months in the lead up, because that's just where so much of the groundwork is. And also there's spillover effects. It's not like we shouldn't be so individualized in how we think of this. Like one, on the volunteer side, people bring friends. And if it's your second time, you might end up with having brought 2 people of your social network there. Whereas if it's your 20th time, it might be, 50 people might be there because of who you have gone there so much. And each time you bring someone and sometimes they bring someone and it just keeps on going out. And then on the other side, we know that in some of the neighborhoods we worked with in Philadelphia, people were engaged early and often and started talking to their neighbors and other people in their households. And so they're having conversations in their own social networks. And those effects, in the month or 2 or 3 or more beforehand are really important. And so just focusing on the individual whose door is knocked, I think we missed that.
Peter, and then I'll read off a question from Mitch Kaminsky. Peter?
David, is there any significance that a total stranger is willing to open her front door and be filmed?
It turns out that when you're there to listen, and when your demeanor is respectful and kind, most people are very comfortable with it. I know. Here's the interesting thing. I don't know of any other campaign that does this, where you film the conversations, which I'm going to say means that political consultants as a group and political practitioners even have overlooked something that every high school football coach in the country knows, which is that having game film to review a few days later is the single best way to help your team improve. And so the video here, it serves a variety of purposes, but the biggest one by far is enabling us to coach ourselves so that we get better. And I bet if any of you do motivational interviewing, my hunch is the first time you tried doing it was not your single best time doing it. I mean, there are very few skillful things in life that you do best the very first time. So if you want a deep canvas, if you're drawn to this, I would just say volunteer now with a group that's deep canvassing near you so that you're actually going to become competent and then excellent, and be able to help others become competent and excellent also.
This is a question for Andrew. Andrew, you said you had 30 colleagues join you in your work. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people think politics is something that they do individually. Other people don't want to hear about politics. It's something I don't talk about with anyone who hasn't talked about politics before. I think a lot of people are turned off from political things because a lot of people engage each other in like argue mode or like, I want to inform you of something from my perspective mode. And I think a lot of people avoid engaging people on political issues in part because of that. During 2020, tried really hard to just be like, this election's really important to me. I'm going to go do this thing. Who wants to come with me? Or I just went and did this thing. Here's how it went. I felt really good. Like, anyone want to join me in the future? And I did that in conversations and in different spaces when when it came up, I feel like it resonated with people. People were thirsty for meaningful action. And then it was very easy to make it, the way the campaign was designed, it was very easy to make it concrete for, helping people figure out like rides and lodging and the COVID protocol and blah, blah, blah. And so, it was very much designed thinking about how someone who hasn't done this before could get plugged in, get trained, get there physically, be supported in any other way that they needed. And so it really was just me starting the prompt of, I did this thing, like, I think if anyone wants to, like, it's really great and come with me. And I just know from a lot of, activism work, like, we can't just show up individually. We really need to bring our friends along so that we have as much impact as possible. And we need to create activist spaces that are welcoming and inviting and energizing for that to be possible. And I was very blessed to be a part of the crew in Philadelphia where that really, really was the case.
For Dave, and then I'll have a couple of comments, and then we'll certainly welcome some last questions before we wrap up. Dave, how do you know ahead of time who's a non-voter, given that they deny they are non-voters?
Well, it's helpful to go out with a voter list, which includes their voting history, but it's not essential because the truth is, the same way infectious disease is geographically concentrated, non-voting is geographically concentrated in neighborhoods with the very lowest cost affordable housing. And so people who work a gig job or a part-time job or several jobs or a minimum wage job, right, are disproportionately concentrated together in neighborhoods. And it's not that they aren't actually capable of voting, and it's not that they're apathetic or lazy. It's that it's easy for them to get disconnected from voting when their life is such a challenge, and when they're much more likely than most people to move more often. So in the neighborhoods we're in, a very large number of people are registered to vote, but not where they live. And so when the state of Pennsylvania mailed out vote by mail applications to every voter at their address on the voter list, our voters never got that stuff. That's what I mean by disconnected. And you and I we get our body weight in junk mail every election, right? What a curse. But it also reminds us there's an election. These folks get nothing. And so the fact that we go to these areas to seek out folks who've been disconnected, I think means that when I knock on a door and I don't know if somebody is registered to vote and I don't know they're a non-voter, the odds are very high that they are a non-voter. And so I proceed like they're a non-voter. And if they are not that, if they are a super voter, they always vote, and there are some of those people in these neighborhoods, they're actually very easy to distinguish just by the conversation you have with them, because all of a sudden they're mentioning Joe Biden's name. They've actually heard of him. They talk about politics in a way that an informed person does. And so then you can have a conversation that incorporates those elements as well. But overwhelmingly, we're talking with people who almost never vote.
So as we begin to wrap up, and then I'll pass on Andrew Goodman's question. I just want to say three things. Number one, another part of Ask Nurses and Doctors is that we've been putting together short documents that are in the link that I just sent out. That, for example, one that we just finished today on drug abuse, are practical actions that activists can take on virtually every healthcare topic. We'll have certainly every healthcare topic covered by the end of June, written either by myself or people throughout the country. And secondly, I want to tell people about our next activist talk, which will be on June 5th, which will be with Kirk Adams, the former head of union organizing for healthcare at SEIU, together with Emily Follow, who is one of the executives at Maine Protect Our Care, and just two wonderful people. So there's a number of, there's one last question. It's 8:59, but as we go to that last question, I just want to say that I want to express my appreciation to Dave and Andrew. For those of you who are lucky enough to hear them, we could all give our applause, and then we'll go to Andrew's last comment. And when people ask me, how did you get into this, and you do like doing this? It's events like this that make me full of joy. And I want to again really thank you, Dave and Andrew. But here's Dave and Andrew Goldstein. Now here's the question from Andrew Goodman. What characteristics, in addition to voting history, do you use to select the homes to canvass? And if we could make it brief, because we have just a minute left, I'll leave it to both of you to answer quickly. Andrew Goldstein?
Yeah, I think Dave kind of covered a lot of this with like neighborhoods where there's infrequent voters, and really just focusing on that neighborhood level is the most important thing, because it's dense with folks. There was actually another question above it from David, that if you live in a secure blue voting area, how do we do deep canvassing and make a difference? And Dave put in the chat to join Changing the Conversation Together if you're able to get to Philadelphia. But I'll just say briefly this story. Changing the Conversation is a spin-off of a group called Get Organized Brooklyn, which was a group of just ordinary people who were angry at the 2016 election results, came together, similar to how many invisible groups came together. And many groups like Invisible Chapters and Get Organized Brooklyn are going to places that are less blue than where they live and engaging voters. And so I'm sure, regardless of where you are, you can find a place that you can go where you can make a big impact. And I know lots of people who in the final weeks actually blocked off whole weekends and flew to the most important geographies for that.
Well, again, on that note, thank you so much to everybody. I'll be sending out the recording to everybody, and I'll send out any information, including some references that were alluded to. I'll be sending them out. Thanks again. Have a good night, and we'll speak again soon.
Hey, Norb, could I
Thanks,
just ask Dave a question, and other
Yeah,
people don't have to
I'll
stay?
send you his contact information because I have to stop. I've got another
Oh,
meeting I gotta go to.
okay, thanks. Okay, I'll write to you, Dave. I've got your contact info.
Thank you,
Bye.
Susan.
All right.
Bye-bye.